A lonely Comanche found an 18-year-old girl bound to a fence and gave her a name, a fire, and a place to belong. New Mexico, 1883. The wind was older than memory that day, and it came screaming across the high desert with a voice made of dust and fury. It howled over the mesas, tore through brittle sagebrush, and swept across the canyons in a storm of red sand that turned the sun to a dim ember behind a wall of haze. There were no birds in the sky, no cattle in the plains, only wind, and the ache of something ancient moving across the earth. Atsa knelt alone at the top of a ridge, his figure still against the storm. Around him the ground was broken shale and bent juniper trees, and in front of him burned a small fire ringed by stones blackened with years of flame. This was not his fire. It had belonged to his mother once, a woman who had whispered to spirits beneath these same skies, who had called to wind and bone in a language older than words. Atsa came here not to pray, not anymore, but to keep something alive, the fire, or maybe what it remembered. Then he heard it, faint, wrong, not the wind's voice, but something thinner, sharp and raw, like the thread of a soul unspooling. Atsa stood slowly, his eyes narrowing, his ears straining against the storm. The wind screamed, lifted his braid, clawed at his coat, but there it was again, that sound. A whimper, human, hurting. Down the ridge, boots steady despite the sand, Atsa crossed the gulch and the dying fence line that marked the old trail. The posts here had long since collapsed, broken teeth jutting from the dirt, but one still stood, and to it someone had tied a girl. She was slumped forward, arms stretched cruelly above her, wrists bound with leather straps that bit into skin gone gray. Her dress, once soft, was torn and filthy, her hair a snarl of blood and dirt. Her fingers were bent inward, nails broken, blood crusted where she had tried desperately to tear herself free. She could not have been more than 18. Atsa paused only a moment, just long enough to see her chest rise, shallow but present. Then he stepped forward, drawing his obsidian knife from the sheath at his hip. With one hand he touched her shoulder, with the other he cut the bindings clean. Her body dropped, he caught her. She weighed almost nothing. Her head lolled against his chest, her breath hot with fever. He did not speak, did not ask her name. He simply removed his long coat, lined with jaguar hide, once belonging to his uncle, and wrapped it around her, arms and all, tucking the fur against her skin like he was guarding something already fading. And then he turned back into the storm. He carried her across the rocks, down into the hidden path only the wind and his mother had known. The world howled around him, dust scraping his face, trying to blind him, but he moved like a man who remembered every root, every bend. The girl stirred once, whimpered again, and then fell silent. By the time they reached the cave, sheltered beneath a ledge of stone, half hidden behind a curtain of cedar, the storm had begun to wear itself thin. Inside, the air was dry and still. The fire pit waited, bones of old flame still resting in the ash. Atsa laid the girl down on a bed of pine and rabbit fur, then crouched beside the coals, coaxed them back with flint and breath. Light bloomed, small and sure. Heat followed. She moaned, shifted. He removed her ruined shoes, washed the blood from her hands, crushed dried root into a paste, and applied it to her wrists, with quiet precision. She didn't wake, not fully, but her fingers curled slightly into the warmth. Atsa sat beside the fire. He said nothing, asked nothing. The wind outside softened. The flames rose slow, and in the hush that settled, the girl breathed easier. But her name was not spoken. Not yet. The first thing she felt was warmth. Not the kind that comes with safety, but the unexpected heat of waking in a place that was not the place she had left behind. Her body ached, deep in the joints, in the bruised ribs, in the raw burns around her wrists. The memory of the fence still clung to her skin, like the smell of smoke long after a fire. Evelyn opened her eyes slowly. She was lying on a bed of fur and dry grass inside a low earthen shelter. The walls were curved, built of hide and cedar and soot-dark stone. A fire burned a few feet away, small but steady. The air was thick with the scent of pine, smoke, and something sharper, herbs perhaps. Outside, the wind had quieted to a whisper. And across the fire sat a man. He moved without sound, hands working with calm precision as he poured hot water into a shallow wooden bowl. Steam rose. He added something, leaves, roots, small blue blossoms, and stirred slowly. He didn't look at her, didn't speak. She sat up too fast. Pain bloomed in her side like a slap. He noticed finally. "Drink this," he said, pushing the bowl toward her without crossing the fire. His voice was low, calm, as though speaking to a deer he didn't want to startle. "It will help the ache." She didn't reach for it. Instead, her voice cracked like old wood. "Why didn't you take anything?" The man paused. Her breath caught. "You had me. I couldn't stop you." He looked at her then, not with confusion, not with offense, but with something quieter, like recognition. "Because nothing was mine to take," he said. The answer hung between them, heavier than silence. She stared at him for a long time, as if waiting for a joke or a shift in tone. But he didn't move, didn't justify or explain. He returned to stirring the herbs. Slowly, with stiff hands, she reached for the bowl. The warmth seeped through her palms, then her throat, spreading down into the places where the cold had settled. She sipped without tasting. He turned his attention back to the fire, still not asking. Evelyn leaned back slightly, glancing around the lodge. There were no weapons on the walls, no trophies, no crosses or flags or signs of claim. Only the rhythm of breath, the whisper of wood, the quiet presence of someone who didn't demand anything at all. "I don't know your name," she said, her voice rasping. He didn't look up. "Atsa." She nodded slowly, though she didn't recognize it. "That means something?" "In my tongue, it means eagle." She glanced at him again. He did not look like the men she'd known. He didn't look down when she spoke, didn't puff his chest, didn't reach to touch. He simply sat, present but not pressing. She pulled the hide tighter around her shoulders. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't ask where she'd come from. Didn't ask what had been done to her. She didn't offer. Not yet. Instead, he spoke, softly. "I call you Yaka." She blinked. "What?" "It means the plant that grows after fire," he said. "One that shouldn't come back, but does." She let out something between a laugh and a sigh. "Why a plant?" "Because you are growing," he said, "even when no one waters you." She stared at him, unsure how to carry the weight of words like that. No man had ever spoken to her like she was still alive inside, like she wasn't just bruises or shame or memory. The fire cracked. She looked down at her hands, at the dried blood beneath her nails, the half-healed scabs across her knuckles, then up again. "Yaka," she repeated. The word tasted like wind. He nodded once. They didn't speak again for a long while. But when she finished the bowl of herbs, and when she lay back down, curling beneath the hide he had given her, her body did not flinch when his shadow moved by the fire. And for the first time in days, maybe weeks, Evelyn closed her eyes, and the dark behind her eyelids didn't rush forward to swallow her whole. Mornings came quietly in Atsa's world, never announced by bells or roosters, but by the color of the sky brushing the tops of the cedars and the slight shift in the wind as it curved down through the canyons. Evelyn woke each day before the sun fully cleared the ridge, her body still stiff with half-healed bruises, but lighter than it had been when she first lay down in that bed of woven grass and fur. There were no clocks in this place, no schedules, no names spoken aloud to claim hours or chores, but somehow she came to know the rhythm of things. Atsa taught without words more often than not. He would kneel beside the coals and show her, with patient hands, how to build a fire that breathed without smoke. It was an art, she came to learn, choosing dry bark, laying the kindling in a pattern that made the flames dance gently, not leap. It was not for warmth only, it was for hiding, for surviving, for not being seen. "You never want to give yourself away," he said once, his voice barely above the crackle of flame. She listened, watched, mimicked. Her hands were clumsy at first, but they learned. He showed her how to chew certain roots to ease the ache in her bones, how to steep dried berries to soothe the heat behind her eyes. Together they walked the slope beyond the shelter, where the earth was marked with trails most would never notice. Hooves that passed in the night, rabbit prints near the water, the winding drag of a snake belly across the dust. "Read the ground," he told her. "It speaks." She smiled, skeptical. "I never learned to read anything else." But slowly she began to see how a leaf turned the wrong way meant a deer had passed, how disturbed moss could mean danger. The land was not quiet, it only waited for you to listen. Atsa carved symbols into flat rocks and pressed her fingers to them. Wind, tree, sky, home. Not in English, but in a language shaped by air and meaning. He did not force her to speak it, but he let her learn it, bit by bit, like one collects feathers or dreams. Each night, before the fire was allowed to fade into embers, Atsa would sit beside the stone altar his mother had built, a small circle surrounded by ash and herbs, its center marked by the burn of time. He never prayed aloud, but he lit incense, twists of cedar bark and dried petals, and placed them with care. Then he closed his eyes and bowed his head. Evelyn never interrupted. She didn't believe in gods, not anymore, but she believed in that silence, the way it changed the air in the shelter, the way it made her own breath slow down, soften, the way Atsa's hands, always so still, moved like ritual and memory. And slowly, without trying, she began to sit near when he lit that fire. Not close, not with questions, just near enough to feel the peace of it. Then came the fever. She woke in the night, skin slick, mouth dry, vision blurred with shadows that bent and twisted at the edges of the lodge. Her body ached as if she'd been dragged through thorns. The fire was dying. She could not call out. She didn't want to. But he came. He knelt beside her without a word, his hand cool against her forehead. He lifted her head, gave her water in careful sips, then pressed a warm cloth to her neck. She drifted in and out, caught between pain and the lull of his steady presence. When she woke again, her fever breaking just after dawn, she found something resting gently against her collarbone. A thin leather cord, dark, worn, with a small carved piece of bone threaded through the center. She touched it, confused. "What is this?" Atsa stirred the fire beside her, his voice low and quiet. "For protection." She stared at it, at him. She had been given things before: food, a place to sleep, a name scribbled on a wall, but always with expectation, always with the understanding that something would be taken in return. Even kindness had come with claws. But this... She closed her hand around the necklace, and tears came, not the hot, angry kind she had known, but something softer, like rain after too long a drought. "You didn't have to," she whispered. "I know," he replied. She said nothing more. And that night, for the first time since she was a child, Evelyn fell asleep with something on her chest that did not weigh her down, and protected her, just as he said. And for that, she dreamed of a fire that never smoked, and a voice that never asked for her name. The wind always spoke louder on the ridge. Atsa had said nothing all morning. He rose before the first light touched the shelter and wrapped himself in his long coat, the same one he had once given her. He motioned for her to follow, offered no explanation, only a steady glance as he nodded toward the trail that curved upward, out of the canyon and into the exposed spine of the hills. Evelyn followed. Her legs had grown stronger in the weeks since he found her, though the scars still throbbed when the nights were cold. Her hair was longer now, not clean but no longer knotted. She wore a tunic he had given her, stitched from deerskin and softened by use. Around her neck hung the leather cord, his gift, and she touched it sometimes without meaning to. The climb was slow, wind clawed at their faces, and dust rose in small spirals from the rocks. As they reached the summit, the land opened wide beneath them. The sky felt closer here, as if the clouds might be touched with an outstretched hand. Far below, the river bent like a ribbon of silver. Pines stood motionless in the distance, but up here, the wind moved everything. Evelyn turned to speak, but Atsa raised a hand, not to silence, but to listen. "Sit," he said simply. She did. Atsa knelt beside her, pulled a leather pouch from his belt and scattered ashes across the flat rock between them. The wind tugged at it, but he shielded the center with his hand. Slowly, deliberately, he began to draw, his fingertip carving shapes into the soot like a man writing prayers. A circle first, then another, smaller inside it. 4 curved lines pointing outward, a spiral. And finally, in the center, he wrote a single word. "Yaka." She stared at it. "That's me." He nodded. "It is now." The wind swept across the ridge, howling through the crevices like a chorus. The symbols trembled, but held. Atsa turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Do you know what this means?" She shook her head. "It is not just your name. It is your mark on this land, a story burned into ash." She studied the spirals. "Why here?" "Because wind remembers." Then he stood and opened both arms wide, letting the air hit him full across the chest. "Give it to the wind," he said. She furrowed her brow. "Give what?" "What you are still carrying." Evelyn hesitated. The breeze whipped her hair across her face, stung her eyes, dried her lips. Her hands clenched in her lap. "What if I can't?" she whispered. He looked at her, the lines of his face lit by a sky turning to gold. "Try." She stood, unsteady at first, then taller. She stared at the word on the ground, Yaka, and felt it settle into her bones. The wind pulled at her clothes, loud, insistent, and she opened her mouth. "I was 15, she said, her voice cracking. Atsa said nothing. "My uncle owed money, sold me to a place with red curtains and locked doors. They called it a dancing house." The wind howled, as if angry. "I ran away 3 times. Once I made it to the river, but they found me. They always found me." She looked up, into the wind. "This time they tied me up and left me there. Said I was a warning." Her throat worked around the next words like they were stones. I thought I'd die there. But you didn't, Atsa said softly. No, she said. You found me. The wind slowed, just slightly. Evelyn stepped forward, knelt beside the ash-drawn symbols, and touched her name. Will I ever forget where I came from? She asked. Atsa crouched beside her. No, he said, but it won't define where you go. Her breath shivered. He reached into his coat again and pulled out a small loop of polished river stones, smooth, cool, worn by years of water. He placed it gently in her palm. This, he said, is the only name you need now. She curled her fingers around it. Atsa stood, turned, and began walking back toward the trail without waiting for her. Evelyn remained, kneeling beside the symbols as the wind carried the ashes skyward, scattering her name into the clouds. And this time, she let it go. The nights were worst. It was not the dark that frightened her, not anymore. It was the silence that came with it, the kind that pressed too close, reminded her of rooms with locked doors and men with quiet mouths and rough hands, the kind of silence that held breath like a blade. Evelyn did not sleep much. Some nights, she would lie under the hide blanket Atsa had given her, listening to the wind scrape against the stones outside, the pop and hiss of the fire dying low. Other nights, she would wake in a sweat, gasping, fists clenched, against a memory that would not let go. She never cried out loud. Only once she murmured something in her sleep, low and panicked, barely words, and when she woke, Atsa was sitting by the fire sharpening his knife. He did not speak of it, neither did she. But that changed on the night of the first frost. The wind had stilled, but the cold slipped through the seams of the shelter like it belonged there. Evelyn lay curled under the blanket, her eyes open, staring at nothing. Her body was tired, so deeply tired, but her mind kept circling. Like wolves on the edge of camp, the old terrors would not go far. That night, though, something in her finally gave out. Her breath slowed, her hands unclenched, and without knowing when it happened, she slept. No dreams, no ropes, no locked doors or the sound of boots on floorboards. Just warmth, his breath. When she woke, the fire was still burning, low but steady. Orange light flickered across the walls, and there, beside it, sat Atsa. He had not moved. His back was straight, legs crossed, eyes half-lidded, as if watching the flames through memory. Evelyn sat up slowly, blanket falling from her shoulders. You stayed all night? She asked, her voice hoarse from sleep. He looked at her, nodded once. You stayed through the storm, he said. I stay through the night. She blinked, throat thick. Her chest tightened, not from fear, but something quieter, something that felt like being known. She looked down at her hands, then toward him again. Why? Atsa tilted his head slightly. Because you needed someone to? She let out a breath that shivered on the way out. I've never had that. He didn't speak, but his gaze didn't turn away. Evelyn shifted forward, her knees brushing the edge of the furs between them. The fire snapped, a curl of ash rising into the air between them. Neither of them reached for the other. But slowly, without thought, her hand moved, just a little, until her fingers grazed the back of his. Atsa's fingers did not close over hers. He did not pull away. They simply stayed like that, touching. It was not a kiss, it was not a promise. But in that light, in that silence, it was something stronger. She looked at him again. I didn't dream, she whispered. His voice was soft. Then, you're waking up. And that night when Evelyn lay back down and pulled the blanket around her shoulders, she felt his warmth still near her and, for the first time in years, her breath came easy. She closed her eyes, and the dark held no teeth. The air had been strange that morning, still, heavy, like the land was holding its breath. Atsa had risen before dawn to check the traps laid deeper in the canyons, leaving Evelyn to tend the fire and prepare herbs for tea. The sky above their shelter was cloudless, but something in the wind felt off, like it carried the scent of men who did not belong to the land they walked. By mid-morning the first hoofbeats cracked the silence. Not the sound of one rider or two, but many, rushed, unpatterned, loud in a way the Comanche never were. Evelyn stepped outside, heart thudding, hands clenched in the folds of her tunic. She knew that sound. She had heard it before, through wooden walls and barred windows. Atsa returned just as the dust rose at the trail's edge. He saw the fear on her face before she could speak, and in a breath he had stepped in front of her, blocking her from view with the stillness of a stone. The men who rode up wore stiff uniforms, badges dulled by wind and time. They were not federal officers, not soldiers, but something worse, private hunters of runaways, hired hands of brothel owners and wealthy buyers, men who fed on the silence of girls with no names left. One of them dismounted, his boots puffing up dust as he stepped forward. "We're looking for a girl," he said, his voice too casual, too sure. "Name's Evelyn Dorsey, 18, took off from a registered property 3 months back." His eyes flicked to the lean figure behind Atsa, only half visible in the shadow of the lodge. "You seen anyone fitting that description?" Atsa did not answer, he only stared. The man gave a short laugh. "You Comanche boys always this talkative?" Evelyn stepped forward then, not fast, not in panic, but with a grace she had never known she owned. She moved to Atsa's side, not behind him, and lifted her chin. Her hair was braided in the Comanche way, tied with a strip of deerskin she had cut herself. Her eyes were calm, but not cold. "My name is Yaka," she said, voice clear. "I am not who you paid for." The man's face twisted. "You don't get to decide that." She didn't flinch. "I just did." He looked to the others behind him, who shifted in their saddles, less certain now. "You got papers?" he barked. "No," she said, "but neither do you, and you don't have my face on anything that will hold up in front of a judge. You don't even know who I am." Another man spat. "Looks like a match to me." "She doesn't match anything anymore," Atsa said, his voice like gravel dragged slow. "She belongs to this land now." The tension snapped tight. Hands hovered near holsters. Dust swirled. Evelyn stepped forward again. Her shoulders were trembling, but she did not break. "You can't drag me back into a name I did not choose." The man stared at her, jaw tight, fingers flexing once. But the moment passed. Too many eyes had seen. Too little proof. Too much silence from the hills behind them, watching, waiting, as if the land itself might rise if they made one wrong move. "Let's go," the man muttered, turning back to his horse. "She ain't worth a noise." One by one the riders turned, and then they were gone, like dust caught in the breath of a shifting wind. Evelyn stood very still. Only when they vanished from view did her breath break loose from her lungs. Atsa stepped beside her. She didn't look at him. "I should have left," she whispered. "You could have been hurt." "You're not a weight I carry," he said quietly. "You are the reason I still walk." She turned to him then, eyes wide with something too big for words. For a long time they said nothing, but her hands found his, and neither of them let go. They built it slowly, with hands that no longer trembled and silences that no longer hurt. It was not large, just a one-room shelter of pine logs and weathered planks, tucked against the boulders where the wind sang through narrow crevices like breath across a reed flute. A small chimney channeled smoke from the hearth. A lean-to outback kept firewood dry. The roof sagged slightly in the middle, but Evelyn loved it for that, like even the house had known how to bend without breaking. The forest pressed close around them, pines stretched tall, unafraid of sky. Wildflowers bloomed in reckless clusters. The wind came and went as it pleased, carrying the scent of pine, ash, and something older, something that had lived here long before either of them arrived. Atsa rose early, always before the birds. He carved shafts for arrows, chipped flint until it sharpened like ice, tanned hide over slow-burning coals. He moved like someone who did not need to be seen in order to belong. Evelyn moved differently. She laughed now, at least sometimes. She spoke more too, especially to the children who wandered from the main encampment to sit outside her little home with wide eyes and endless questions. She taught them letters, sounding out each shape in English and then, when they asked, in Comanche too. She wrote the alphabet in charcoal on smooth river stones, taught them how to trace the curves of their names. "Letters are like bones," she told them once. "They hold stories upright." Sometimes, Nokoma came and sat beside her while the children wrote. The old woman never corrected her pronunciation but would nod when she got it right, and smile, with a deepness that made Evelyn feel like her breath had weight again. The cabin became more than shelter. It became rhythm. It became language. It became home. One night, near the end of summer, Evelyn stood outside long after the fire had died down. The moon had not yet risen, and the stars hung heavy and bright above the dark spine of the trees. The wind stirred softly, rustling through the leaves like fingers combing through memory. She stood at the edge of the clearing, arms wrapped loosely around herself, listening. Atsa stepped out behind her, barefoot, his movements quiet as ash falling. She did not turn when she spoke. "This is the first place I didn't feel owned." He didn't answer right away. The wind moved again, cooler now, brushing against her face, pulling at the edge of her tunic. Then, gently he said, "Because this land owns no one, it just holds them." Evelyn closed her eyes. Let the words settle. The silence that followed was not the kind that waits for permission to be broken. It was the kind that lets people breathe into it. She reached down, picked up a smooth stone from the grass, and traced a letter into the dirt with its edge. Then another. "Why?" Then the rest. Yahka, her name. Not the one she had been born with, not the one she had been sold under, but the one she had earned. The one the wind had taught her to carry. Tatsa stepped beside her, not touching, but near enough she could feel his presence. "You know what that means now," he said. She nodded. "It means I lived." Behind them, their home stood like a promise made of wood and ash. In front of them, the forest stretched like a secret with no end. And somewhere between breath and silence, Evelyn knew this truth. She had not been rescued. She had been named. And in that naming, she had begun again. The day of the naming came with wind that moved not like weather, but like memory. It spun through the trees with purpose, whispering down from the ridgelines, tugging at loose braids and loose thoughts. The sky above was an endless dome of pale blue, stretched wide with possibility. And at the edge of the forest clearing, where the grass grew long and the rocks were warmed by the sun, the tribe gathered. They had done this only a handful of times in living memory, called the wind to witness, spoken truth into the air so that it would never be forgotten. Evelyn stood in the center of a circle of stones. She wore a tunic dyed with sage and bark, her hair braided back in the Comanche way, bone beads threaded at the tips. Around her neck hung the leather cord she had once worn from the brothel, now empty, holding only its own history. Nakoma came forward, walking slowly, her steps sure despite her age. The old woman's shawl fluttered in the breeze, and her hands were lined like dry riverbeds. She stepped beside Evelyn and placed both hands gently on her shoulders. The wind stilled. "You are Yaka," Nakoma said, her voice low but resonant, as if it belonged to more than one lifetime. "You are wind-rooted. You are no one's daughter. You are the child of storms." The words did not settle on the air, they sank into it, like stones into river silt, becoming part of the earth. Evelyn's throat tightened. She turned toward the fire they had kindled behind her, small, steady, the way Atsa always made it, and knelt. From the pouch at her side she drew the old necklace. Its leather was frayed, the charm darkened by time and memory. She held it in her palm for a long breath, then placed it in the heart of the flame. Smoke rose. She did not cry. Not yet. "I'm not erasing who I was," she said, her voice soft but unshaken. "I'm burying her, so Yaka can grow." The fire snapped in agreement. Behind her, someone stirred. She looked up. Atsa stood at the edge of the circle, his hands loose by his sides, his expression unreadable as always, but his eyes, dark as storm clouds, held her like something sacred. Evelyn stood, faced him. She took a step forward, then another, until the fire flickered between them. "You never kissed me," she said. Her voice caught on the edge of it, a truth laid bare with no demand. Atsa looked at her for a long time, then said simply, "I kiss the fire each night to keep you warm." That was all. And it was everything. She stepped around the flame and reached for his hand, not to pull him, not to possess him, but to share weight. He let her. Fingers interlaced, they turned together toward the hill that overlooked the valley. The wind moved around them like a dance too old to remember the steps. When they reached the top, Atsa knelt and began to prepare a fire, the same way his mother once had, with kindling tucked beneath dry moss, flint struck with reverence. Evelyn sat beside him, watched his hands, watched the flame come alive. She leaned into his shoulder. He did not move away. "This land has many names," she said, after a while. "But today," he answered, "it only needs one." "What name is that?" He looked at her, then touched the center of her chest, where her heartbeat was strongest. "Yaka." The wind curled around them then, rising in a spiral, not fierce, not loud, but sure. It lifted ash from the fire into the air, drew a soft moan from the tall grasses, swept Evelyn's braid over her shoulder like a hand brushing hair from a beloved face. She closed her eyes. And in that sound, in that breath, she felt it. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but something better. Belonging. And so, with wind in their hair and fire between their hands, they sat as night rose behind the trees. No promises spoken, no futures drawn. Only the truth of now, and the name she had chosen. The one no one could steal. If this story stirred something in your heart, the wind of a name remembered, the fire of a home found in silence, then you are one of us. At Wild West Love Stories, we believe some of the greatest love stories were never written in books, but lived in dust, shadow, and open sky. If you want more tales of souls who found each other beyond the edge of the world, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like, and share this story with someone who still believes in healing love. Because out here in the West, the wind still remembers. And so do we.